Hello, Sandy. How are you today?
I am most excellent.
Sandy,
Yes.
you know, I've been very impressed that you designed this 2-hour training that has kind of caught fire, literally, that you entitled what?
Recovery ally training.
And
Really
then
sexy and creative.
and then we were at the walk
Hmm.
and we had a booth together at our recovery walks, and you sat down next to Alison Jones Webb in the title of her book.
Recovery allies.
W- Were you surprised?
Oh, I was like, what did I do?
Well,
Did I
well,
do it
I'm trying to
wrong?
like, why are you talking so?
Am I talking softly? I think I'm talking loud.
Uh,
But here's the thing, you got to back this up a step.
I do.
Yeah, you do because you were looking at different book sizes for your own book
Mm-hmm.
in the size you should publish.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked me to check out these different books that you had.
Mm-hmm.
And one was Recovery Allies with the foreword by Philip Valentine. And I was like, are you kidding me? I've been living in this space for 3 years and you never shared with me that you were part of this experience, knew about this book.
Well, frankly, how curious are you about my day-to-day activities?
Oh, okay, I'll give you that. So anyway, I'm super excited that the author of that book, Alison Jones Webb, sat down next to me at Recovery Walks and is here on the podcast today. Hi, Allison.
Hi, and it was wonderful being at the walk. I really enjoyed meeting people. It was great sitting down next to you as well. I took all kinds of photos of your display for
Oh,
your Yukon display.
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, and it was fun sitting next to Phil and just chatting.
We sold tens and tens of copies, and that's how many I've sold so far, you know. Uh, it still
I
hasn't
think
gotten
that's
much better from that day,
He's
but
not going
hey,
viral yet, but
no,
I think that's kind of how it is.
I
Yeah.
guess we're not going to buy our beach home in on the Cape or anything with all our proceeds, you know, but I might be able to buy a lure or two.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's not even talk about fishing right now. Let's talk about Recovery Allies and Allison.
So, Allison, tell us a little bit about your journey to where you decided to or got the offer to write this book.
Um, so as you probably know, so I'm not in recovery myself, but I have a lot of people in my family who have had substance use disorders. Some of them have found recovery, some not, and that runs up and down the generation. So my grandparents' generation, maybe before that, I don't know. My parents' generation, my own generation, my children's generation. And so I feel like I have this familiarity
Mhm.
with substance use that's kind of baked into my DNA. However, no immediate experience in my family growing up.
So you said baked into your DNA. You've never been baked, like on marijuana?
Oh, that's a good one. Good one. I'll have to think
I
about
should
that.
say
Don't
that.
don't encourage that
I know.
behavior.
Okay.
Darn
Stop.
about that. I've been baked.
Stop.
You know that, right?
I haven't.
I've
Stop.
been totally baked.
Okay,
Anyway,
so
go
one of us
ahead.
has to retain some level
It's
of.
some decorum here.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay. So, I started working in public health in Maine in the year 2000, and I did a bunch of different things. I'm just like really super interested in community-based work and the opportunities that were available in the community then, which was in central Maine, had to do with promoting physical activity and healthy eating, and
Mhm.
so forth. And so along comes the data on opioid overdose deaths that start to rise in Maine as elsewhere. Took us all by surprise. And so I was asked to do some work on creating a harm reduction program. So I had done some prevention work and I had done a little bit of, just kind of reading. I didn't really know that much about substance use disorder. So I did. I did some reading and I just got completely fascinated by it because I felt like explained a lot of things about this stuff that's baked into my DNA. So it's just answered a lot of questions about, questions I had about what is going on in my family, because people never talked about it and so forth. So, so one of the projects that I got involved with, which was a lot of fun, was a federally funded project to bring treatment for adolescents and young adults to Maine. So we had very little treatment then, still don't have very much. It's a pretty big gap in services generally, I think. We on the project wanted to find out more, like, what do parents think? What do young people think? What do guidance counselors think? I had this great idea. I still think it's a great idea, to train young people in recovery to do focus groups, right? Because when you do a focus group, you want the person who's facilitating the group to sort of be a member of the group that you're talking to. Makes it easier to talk. There's a lot more trust involved. And so I trained 4 young people in recovery, and we did these focus groups. We went around the state. It was a lot of fun. And we found what is not at all surprising, which is that stigma, shame, embarrassment was the biggest reason that kids didn't seek help, parents didn't seek help, and even, at the level of teachers and guidance counselors, just didn't talk about it. Those same young people had been trained in how to talk about their recovery, which is a story that focuses on the positive aspects of recovery and not the negative aspects of addiction. Of course, we were talking about opioid use disorder because that's what was and is on everyone's mind. They were so engaging and they were so excited about their own recovery. They were so inspiring. I got inspired. People in the rooms where we were talking got super inspired and also would ask this question after every single time they presented. Well, this is so great. What can I do? So I felt really genuinely called to write something. I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be, but it's like, well, somebody has to answer that question for people in the community who really, they know about addiction, but they probably have a lot of misperceptions. Many people don't know about recovery. It was a word that didn't enter my lexicon growing up. So that was sort of the beginning of thinking about writing. And I'll tell you, I remember the first time that I identified, if you want to say that, identified myself as an ally. So with these young people, we're going around and they introduce themselves and they've got the script. My name is so and so. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Da da da. And I would follow and I would say, and my name is Alison Webb, and I work with these guys. And at one point after the presentation, one of the young men said to me, Mrs. Webb, I got to tell you, that was really lame.
I love that.
You need to come up with something else.
Right.
And they helped me. Actually, they helped me sort of come up with this. Yeah, like you're an ally, which again, just wasn't a phrase that was used all that much back in the day.
Yeah, we defined the recovery community as people in recovery, family members, friends, and allies. And we had been doing that since 1999, 2000. That's how Bob Savage introduced the recovery community to me, which is basically everybody, right? People in recovery, family members, friends, and allies. So it's just about everybody. And where did you first? So you came up with that? They helped you with that term.
Yeah.
And where did you first hear it?
So I was getting involved in working in recovery and higher education, and a lot of my colleagues across the nation were doing recovery ally training. And so it seemed like a good way to what I refer to as tilling the soil, to change the culture at UConn. And because nobody knew we had a collegiate recovery program there, it was this best kept secret. And so we weren't reaching students. And I knew that I needed, out of 30,000 students across our campuses and 6,000 staff members, I needed a tool to penetrate all those areas so that if somebody was struggling, hopefully someday, somewhere in their circle, somebody will know about recovery and how to get students connected. And so we've trained about 550 in the last 2 years.
That's
with
awesome.
obviously a drop in the bucket when you're looking at a population of 36,000, but progress, not perfection.
But I also
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you. How do you define recovery ally? What does that mean to you?
Well, so those are two separate questions.
Yeah.
How do I define it? I usually say it's a person who um, is, how do I say it? A person who cares about recovery, but then uses her strengths and connections and networks and resources to support people in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to learn about addiction and recovery. It's like this endless journey of learning, which is one thing I love about it. I continue to learn and be inspired by people in recovery. And then I write about it and I do advocacy work and so forth. But for me, like what's in my heart is really learning about it and being inspired by it.
Same question for you, my love.
Yeah, so I define it as a person who acknowledges that substance use disorders and other mental and behavioral health challenges are diseases and not moral failures. That when you're coming alongside somebody who is immersed in one of these challenges, you treat them with empathy and care,
Dignity and respect.
dignity and respect, and that you know how to get them connected to resources. And then the advocacy piece, which is important, which is kind of my next level. I want to level up now with what we do next, is that you take that knowledge back in whatever it is you do, whatever space you occupy, whether that's a committee or an office or you're leading an organization, that you do something differently because of that understanding. I don't care if it's putting a sticker on your door saying you're a recovery ally and making it known that you're somebody that they can reach out to, or you change the way your operation practices in something more significant. And for us, one of those significant ways was putting substance-free housing in place at UConn, where it had not been for over 15 or 20 years.
I'm going to steal that definition. That's awesome.
Which
It's
part?
great. Well, I like the walking alongside, raising the issues of empathy and respect, of course, but also doing something,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? You take your knowledge and you take whatever it is that has changed in you as you've learned about addiction and recovery, you do something about it, whatever that is.
I just think there's so much more power when people, and I started using this word activate because of a TikTok video, which is probably wrong, but now I can't find another word that I like better, but I like when people activate from their new knowledge and their heart. And if I tell them what to do, it's going to come from my knowledge and my heart. And I don't think it has the same authenticity. But I'm not beyond that. If folks want to ask me what I think they should work on, I'm happy to share. But I just think it's so much more valuable, more sustainable, more impactful when folks take those seeds that we plant and they do something that they feel led to do. Like you were led to write this book.
Mm-hmm. I have yet to see a person who's heard and listened, right? Like genuinely heard stories of addiction and recovery, who hasn't been moved. And so, I really have yet to see that. And so that does engage the heart. That's what's happening there. And so, given enough time, people whose hearts are touched that way, they figure it out. What we can also do is provide like a fertile environment for them to do something and feel comfortable doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So tell us about the book. How'd
So
you
the
get
book,
there? How'd you get there?
I would say I had no idea what it was like to write a book. And I probably should have talked to other people about writing a book before I did it. But I didn't. I spent a lot of time interviewing people in recovery, which is the fun part. I talked to you, Phil. I came
Yeah.
down through CCAR. That was right before COVID hit.
Mhm.
So our plan had been we were going to drive down the East Coast, my husband and I, go to all these recovery centers, do interviews, learn a lot, right as I went along. The content of the interviews shapes the book, really.
Mhm.
Not surprisingly, there's themes that emerge. And I would get suggestions from people that I interviewed. Oh, you should talk to so and so. Oh, if you want to hear a story that addresses sort of childhood trauma, you should talk to so and so. So that I got a varied group of people to interview. And then I ended up doing a lot of those on Zoom.
So, how long did it take you to write this thing?
She's way
Yeah.
faster than you. It's because she didn't get it. She didn't get a resentment along the way.
No. Well, she's a better writer than I am too, so
So I'm
she writes
curious
out of-
because I work on a team with public health educated colleagues. When you look at the difference between prevention and treatment, prevention and recovery, how do you equate those two?
So it's funny you should mention that because I just wrote an article about this, which I asked to write because I feel so strongly about it.
Mhm.
That, the things that we work on in the prevention field to keep young people healthy, engaged, resilient, mentally and psychologically healthy are pretty much the same things that we should be addressing in recovery. Yeah. So, in public health and in prevention, we call it the social determinants of health.
Mhm.
In the recovery world, a lot of times it's more like recovery capital, or the recovery ecosystem, but it's all the same. And so, again, like going back to this, like I am so passionate about work in the community because that's where people live, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's where we find our relationships, good or bad. It's where we get our food, good or bad. It's where we recreate or not. It's where we learn habits. It's where, we may end up, taking some bad steps that we then need to, okay, how am I going to fix that? And
Mhm.
that's the same for recovery and for prevention.
That's
What are your thoughts?
No, so I actually secured a small grant that we were able to hold a building recovery friendly campus workshop with last April. I built my case for that grant that recovery is prevention. And my bias is that we focus our prevention efforts so much on what not to do that we're not filling young people's airways with what to do. So we put tons of effort into giving them all the data, what not to do, and people are continuing to do it for generations. This isn't just, oh, it's different when we were kids. No, it was exactly the same when we were kids. So I'm just really want to flip the effort to taking all the tools that work in recovery, that sense of connection and belonging, and then the practices like mindfulness and meditation and fitness and all the things, and put them up front and stop focusing on what not to do.
Well, hallelujah. I'm like right with you. Absolutely. And I think, a lot of the focus on prevention also is on education, which is important.
Mhm.
Never let it be said that I'm not in favor of education. But, for young people, telling young people anything is, as we know, not terribly effective. We've all learned that. Either ourselves or with our own kids. And so, it's all about sort of creating an environment of well-being,
Mhm.
and trust and so forth. And that's like right along the lines of what happens in recovery also.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've given this any thought, but I also think of recovery as a harm reduction strategy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, when recovery is visible,
Mhm.
it's very much acts as, hope and harm reduction for people who are sort of currently using. These categories, these little silos that we have don't work too well after a while when you
Mhm.
really think about it.
So as we talk about Recovery Allies. Where can people find your book?
So it's published by North Atlantic Books, and they have a website, northatlanticbooks.com. So it's available there. It should be available also online at Barnes and Noble,
Mm-hmm.
online at Target, and online at Amazon because everything's for sale on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And then it will be in bookstores. So when I was up in Maine last time, I was very gratified to see that it was in a local bookstore. It made me feel pretty good. And it will be in some libraries. And so I will put out a shout out if you go to your library and it's not there, ask your librarian to order it because they'll do that. They'll do that for you.
In general terms, if somebody just saw this, they walked into a Barnes and Noble, saw your book, what would appeal to them? What would you hope would appeal to them?
Actually, I would hope the cover appeals to them because it's very attractive
It
It
for
is.
is.
starters.
I
All
love your
right.
font. I love your color choice.
Yeah.
I'm all
And
about it.
this was the press, right? So I worked with the press and they came up with this design, but it wasn't in purple.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, we got to do purple. Like everything works except that it needs to be purple because it's recovery. That's
Mm-hmm.
the color of recovery. If somebody picked it up, I think that many people who see it are going to think about their own family situation. This is what I've noticed that people talk to me about,
Yeah.
and that this might be a place like if I have someone in my family who's struggling, this might be a place where I can get some help, get some answers, um, and so that's great. But I am definitely trying um, to spread the word that it's really more, it's for more than just family members. It's for social workers, it's for healthcare providers.
Mhm.
There was a conference up in Maine last week for people who are employed at county jails, sheriffs and so forth. And they all got a book. They all got a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they were talking about medication assisted treatment in the jails, and that book was distributed. Um, so I would hope that people who intersect with individuals in recovery, whatever that means in your life or in your work, would see it as, that's something I might be able to benefit from.
So when I think of Recovery Ally too, and I can't tell you how many calls over the years that we have fielded at the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery from family members, concerned others, wanting to get their person struggling with a substance use disorder into recovery. Like they have the power to do that. So we're always talking about, well, can we talk to the person, But there's also this piece is family members are so, and loved ones and neighbors and allies are so concerned that they don't often have the right tools or the right questions to ask. And does your book address that and how?
It does somewhat. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, I'm not a counselor myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a social worker, and so I don't want to pretend that I have the answers in that domain. I know from my own experience, from what people have told me, what people in recovery have told me, is that the two most important things are to maintain a loving connection with your family member, if that's possible. It's not always possible, but no matter how afraid you are, or how ticked off you are, or whatever other emotions are percolating up that aren't necessarily positive, to maintain the connection, because when the person that you love is in a different space and ready to seek some help, you want to have you want that connection to be there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I say. And to get educated also, I think a lot of times, uh, especially, well, I was going to say especially when it's kids, but that's not necessarily true. But a lot of times addiction hits a family like a tornado. Like they had no idea
Mhm.
what was going on, and all of a sudden they're in this maelstrom. And so to get educated, and that's actually one of the things that people have told me this book does really well, It's just general for the general public, but it describes different aspects of addiction and different aspects of recovery. It's not polemical in any way. So there's a little bit, for everybody there. So to get educated. But then, the other thing that I have understood and people in recovery have told me is, when my family started to set boundaries that were clear, that we talked about, not just slamming the door as a boundary, but when we talked about what we can do together and what we can't do together and what's acceptable and what's not, the family got healthier. The individuals in the family got healthier, which is really important because you could be in it for a long haul, and you want to be able to find ways to take care of yourself as well as, be looking out for the person that you're so worried about.
I
You know,
love that you said the family gets healthier. Is that kind of what you emphasize when you're talking to allies? Because you have so many parents
yeah.
talking about their kids and
So it's interesting. You said at the beginning that you weren't in recovery. And when I think about how I got into recovery was actually through Al-Anon, based on relationships in my life that I was in with people with substance use disorders. And we referred to ourselves as being people in recovery. And it's really probably codependency is the thing most in recovery from. So when families talk to me about, how to be that support and I do talk a lot about boundaries, and I talk about their own recovery and focusing in on their needs in this process. And I always emphasize, do not set a boundary that you can't actualize, because that is really detrimental to you and to them. So if you say the next time you show up drunk, you're going to get kicked out of the house, like, you got to be willing to kick them out of the house or
Mhm.
choose something else. And I always tell families, don't let anybody else tell you what your boundaries should be. Like, you've got to come to that. And so working on your own recovery to get to a place where you can establish boundaries that make your life better. Because you're right, sometimes this is a really long haul. And, just recently we've had such an influx of first year students, the largest number of first year students I've ever seen in our collegiate recovery program. I am so impressed and inspired by what their families have done to become equipped and educated and to support in a real way, and setting those boundaries for them that is putting them on their own path to wellness.
I think it also, when you set boundaries, it's not just we're having a boundary here. It's a conversation, and so the
Mhm.
act of setting the boundary, the act of having that conversation, is all part of that healing process. Of wait, so we got a problem with our relationships here. Let's figure out what's going to work for all of us. And so it's a conversation. It's not just the hammer's coming down, and this is
Mhm.
how it's going to happen. That it's really I don't want to say collaborative because that's a little bit too positive. But it is something that members of the family work on together for
Yeah.
sure.
it's mutual.
Mutual. There we go.
And
Yeah.
there was also a time when we're having this conversation, I think of our son, Matthew, and that day where I I didn't set the boundaries, but I asked a question that he teetered with, and the question was, do you want to continue to live here? Because of his use. And he actually has told us since that he actually thought about, I was ready to, I might leave. But then he came to the conclusion that no, he did want to stay.
But that was also, we were not in alignment.
Oh, I
So Phil
know.
said
I was,
he was
Mm-hmm.
ready to lay
Mm-hmm.
down that boundary, and I
Mm-hmm.
said, I am not.
mhm.
So, I think that's always a struggle too for families, is to be able to come together to lay
Mm-hmm.
that boundary down, because the disease will fight for survival. And the disease would rather tear our marriage apart
Yeah.
in a situation like
Mhm.
that than anything else. So, I always feel as though when I am talking with the disease, I've got to be really clear about it, that I'm not talking with my child, that I love.
Mhm.
I am
Mhm.
talking to the disease and how is the disease operating in the moment.
Mhm.
That's a very powerful concept to think about, talking to the disease and not the person.
Mhm.
That's powerful.
Mhm.
Well, it has helped me when I do work with families
Mhm.
because my gosh, you know, whether you gave birth or chose this child to be your family and to see things move in that direction and to not understand how on earth this could have happened to
It's
us.
heartbreaking.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and then even when the child has received a overwhelming education and has not changed their course or their trajectory, like but here's the slide, here's the evidence.
Mhm.
Um, it goes sideways. So that's when we start talking about who you're talking to, your baby boy, your baby girl, or are you talking to the disease of addiction that wants to survive?
Mhm.
So I'd like you to, as we wrap up here, hold that book up one more time and point to the part where it says
Oh,
"Forward" by Phil
somehow
Valentine.
I knew you
Oh.
were
No,
gonna. I
I
totally knew. So this is the funny thing, Allison, is
See?
that it pops up now when you look for Phil's book because they think he's an author of your book.
Ah,
Yeah,
that's fine with me.
yeah, exactly.
Right? Any
So,
publicity is good publicity, right?
so there we go.
Well, you better
Recovery
finish his
Yeah.
book
allies.
first, Allison, before you say that.
Oh, okay.
Well, and I also, on behalf of the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery and the recovery community that I'm associated with, thank you for writing that book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a very needed piece, and I applaud you for discovering that niche or that gap and being willing to fill it with something that's very useful, and it'll help people for generations. That's how good it is.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Phil, and I really do hope that it is helpful. That's the whole point, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks for being our ally.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
And thanks for being on as a guest. I
It was
appreciate
a
you.
pleasure. It's a lot of fun.